got the wind on us. I don't believe he's gonna come in any closer.
You see the 2 bucks chasing those doves?
Yeah, out in that pasture. Yeah.
It looks like that's what he's interested in too, though.
Yeah. Yeah, he got a scent of that, and he's not gonna come any closer to us. Let's see if maybe we can't move and find us another spot. That's one of his offspring right there, Robert. These long tines, they're just like that older deer. You with that doe, he's gonna go wherever she goes.
Pushing her away from those other bucks.
And there is his daddy. Over underneath that tree, that's the big boy. See him coming right yonder?
Oh yeah. Yeah. You can really tell the difference.
Yeah, I wish they'd both get in the same picture, because I guarantee you that's the same type of horns.
There they are together.
Yeah, when they kill him this year, he definitely has left some of his offspring behind. You smelling her out. She's evidently not receptive at this time. You don't want anything to do with her. You're just gonna keep on prowling and checking. kind of feeling each other out. You had some sure enough older mature deer, it'd be causing a lot more ruckus than that. Those both look like yearling deer, first set of animals. These younger deer, they get frustrated pretty easy in a deer population like this, where you got a 1-to-1 buck to doe ratio. They don't get to do very much of the breeding at all. In fact, I'd say very little. So they get frustrated pretty easy, and they spend lots of time prowling and fighting amongst each other. Outside of the high fence, out on native range, these deer like this are going to do a fair part of the breeding, and because there's more deer in that 1.5-year-old age class than any other age class, and these 1.5-year-old deer will also do lots of roaming outside of a high fenced area on open range. We've had some of these deer that were marked, freeze branded, that were killed as far as 6-7 miles from where we branded them as fawns. On the rule though, this yearling age class of deer, your roamers, they'll roam 2, 3, 4 miles during the rut. They're seeking a place where they fit in the social order of the deer herd. They just don't quite know where they belong or what their role in this deer herd is. Kind of like a 16, 17, 18-year-old boy. A little light on the production end this year with just one. have to be what he's doing. Rubs like this you'll find all throughout this pasture. When you have a buck-doe ratio like there is in this ranch on 1-to-1 basis, the bucks are real active marking their territories. And they'll make these rubs like this right here to mark the territory. And as big a tree as this is on, I'd say it has to be one of the larger bucks in the pasture that's made this rub. Your smaller bucks, you'll find they'll rub on smaller branches and little trees. I've even seen some of them rub on some of these bigger goat weeds before, your little bitty yearling bucks. But this is a sign that you have a big, large buck in the area, and he's using this area frequently. Now this is a rub. We're going to walk over here to a tree that I found a scrape on a while ago, and of course there's a difference between a rub and a scrape. Some people get confused on this, but this is a rub. This is made with the antlers rubbing against the tree. It's a scrape now, and these are made by bucks coming up to low overhanging limbs. They'll nibble the leaves off of these end of these limbs. They may rake their horns up around in here. Then they'll take the tip end of these little stubby limbs that they've chewed off, and they'll rub them in the gland right in front of the eye, and that puts a scent on that little twig, and this recognizes this scrape as that buck's particular scrape. Then he'll take his forefeet and paw out the ground underneath this overhanging limb. There's a good way to find scrapes in an area is look for low overhanging limbs where the leaves have been chewed off. And you'll look on the ground, there's a good chance you'll find a scrape there. This particular scrape, something's come by this morning right there in that spot and urinated in this scrape. Your bucks will urinate in this scrape also to mark them. Plus, you'll have does. They're made usually close to trails, and does will come by that are in heat and urinate in these scrapes, and the bucks check them, and that's how they tie up with the does. You wonder in areas where you have a few deer high in the world, bucks and does ever get together to mate and keep the population going. Well, this is one of the ways right here. But this is the difference. This is a scrape, and the rub on a tree where the bark is knocked off by the antlers, that's a rub. Hey, one up on the other side. You're not getting him, are you?
I see his feet.
4710.
Well,
These are some shed antlers that were picked up, the JWs picked up here on the ranch. The set of antlers right here beside me are the antlers that were shed off of the biggest deer that we've seen today last year. And I'm going to go through and score these antlers to get an idea of about what this deer will score next year. The tine length on this deer, or longest tines, are just short of 12 inches. In measuring for Boone and Crockett, you look for some symmetry and length. And this deer has a lot of both. The only really strong deductions that the deer would have would be on the last points out on the main beam. There's a 4-inch difference in those 2 points. One of them is 4 inches long, the other one is 8 inches long. Main beam length is extreme importance. You got to have a deer in that 25-inch type main beam length to make the book. It just takes a long main beam and points coming off of this main beam that has length. You got your circumference measurements is taken in 4 places in between the points on each antler, and it's the smallest point in between these 2 points projecting off the antler. You do this on both sides. Each horn is measured separately and then compared to the other side, and the deductions taken away from the total score for a net Boone and Crockett score. Now, the way you measure a point is you find the top line on the main beam of the horn and draw your line there with a pencil. Then you take from that point along the outside curvature of the point and to the tip. You do this for each point coming off of the main beam that's considered a normal point. This deer is a basic 10-point deer. He's has broken his brow tines off, so I will have to estimate his brow tines, and from observing him last year, I'd say he had probably 3.5-inch brow tines on both sides, and I'm going to guess his spread last year inside at about 17 inches. The bases on these antlers are around 4.5 inches on each side.
Bob, this is probably a trip of a lifetime. I really appreciated the opportunity to come over with you and take some video of some of the wildlife that's on J.W. Golla's place. We're real fortunate to catch them early in the morning and this time of the year where maybe they're a little more gentle than they are when they're out of velvet. I'm really impressed with the type of herd he has. I did get to see those deer last year, I guess probably mid part of the season, so this would be an opportunity for me to see them before the season. And I can already see by looking at the horns that it looks like he's still got some good deer left in his place.
Yes, J.W. has done a lot of hard work on this place. And this is one thing that a lot of people don't realize, and that's that when you put up a high fence, the work begins after the fence is completed, because there's a lot of things that go into intensive management of a white-tailed deer herd. J.W. had to do some clearings in this place to where he could get around it real easily and see his deer, and fenced off some areas for some oats patches and food plots to where he could not only supply some supplemental feed but also allow him to harvest his deer. J.W. built this fence in 1980 and called on a department biologist there at Columbus to assist them in trying to manage a deer herd behind a high fence. He enclosed 320 acres, and he realized that to give these deer all what they needed, that he was going to have to supplemental feed these deer with a high protein feed. J.W. wanted to grow as big a deer as he could grow in Colorado County. He wanted to see exactly what size deer that he could grow on this 320 acres. We told him first off that he was going to have to get some age on his deer herd, and that he was going to have to provide them with around a 16% protein diet on a year-round basis, and that the number of deer he could run in here was really going to be controlled by his pocketbook, just depending on how much feed he wanted to pour out in a year-round basis. And these deer, it's hard to say, but they're probably around 75% of their diet comes out of a sack. There were, when the fence was built, there was approximately 15 deer caught within the fence. They're all Colorado County native white-tailed deer to the area. No deer have been brought in to improve the genes of this herd. This is your deer that's there. This is a common question that we get is, you know, why can't we bring in some genes from the outside? Well, after you view the deer in this film, I think you will readily see that there's no need to bring in deer from the outside. The genetic makeup is there on these deer, and to supply a rancher or hunter with just about every antler type that he could envision. Here's some turkeys that have been stocked on the ranch by J.W. These are raised, hatched in captivity, and then turned loose on the wild. In this group of deer right here, there's one really large buck there in this group of deer. He's right here in the center of the picture. This is probably the best deer on the ranch. This deer is 6.5 years old, He has extremely long tines. He's a deer that just about anybody would shoot, whether you were hunting in South Texas or Colorado County. You see a deer like this walk out, you're going to want to get your gun and put him in your sights.
That's the good thing about hunting and comparing deer. Before we saw this big one, you know, all the others look pretty good size, and this one just stands out. So if you're ever trophy hunting, you know when you see that big buck, because he stands out above and beyond all of those others.
That's right. That's a question you get a lot of hunters that go to South Texas, which has a reputation of growing big deer, and a lot of the people hunt there for the first time. They ask the question, well, how do I know which one I want to shoot, and that it is a good deer, and that I'm not messing up and killing a good 3.5-year-old deer that's a coming good deer. And pretty much the standard answer to that is when those good deer walk out, you know it. You reach for your gun instinctively, not your binoculars or spotting scope to check him out. And if you have to sit there and kind of sell yourself on a deer, or talk yourself into shooting him, he's not the deer you're looking for.
And you may not get a second chance.
That's right. This deer, Boone and Crockett wise, is going to score probably in the neighborhood of around 160 gross points, low 160s. For those of you who aren't aware, 170 is the minimum score to get in the Boone and Crockett record book. So JW is producing near record book deer on this ranch, and I think if you got right down to it, that's probably his goal. He would like to produce a record book deer here on the ranch. It's hard to see in these pictures, but I talk like I know the age on some of these deer out there, and it's because that I do. We have helped JW since this place was put under high fence, tag some of his fawns every year, which helps us as department biologists to learn along with JW in this program, and to be able to tell the quality of bucks within age classes. And this has helped JW tremendously in learning his deer herd and learning something about the deer herd. It helps us into seeing the quality within age classes on high protein feed mixed with your natural range diet. We've done high protein research, high protein feed studies within the state, mostly up on the Kerr Wildlife area, and these deer are totally high protein fed deer. But when you mix the wild food supply with it, the native foods, we didn't quite know. Now these two deer right here are deer that are in the 2.5 and 3.5-year-old age class. These deer are not your top bucks, the ones you want to shoot. These are what you call your coming bucks. These are going to be your quality bucks another 2 to 3 years down the road. What you're stressing here, your goal is to try to get bucks into the 5.5 and 6.5-year-old category. This is where your quality really shines on your white-tailed deer bucks.
Really, your deer don't start maturing till about 3.5 years, and that's when they're really starting to grow the horns.
That's right. And these deer, as you can see right here, they're feeding, just easing along feeding, so that, you know, they are taking some of your natural foods out there along with your high protein feeds. This time of year generally are compatible with antlers in velvet. They're very protective of their antlers, and they tend to put up with each other a lot better than they do once the antlers are hardened and the onset of the rut begins. These deer are mainly right there, they're eating forbs, little flat leaf plants that grow out in these openings. Deer in the state of Texas are predominantly forb eaters. And
Is that another name, Bob? Is that like a browse? They do browse, but that's sometimes we call it browse that they eat. But you say it's forbs?
forbs is like weeds.
Okay.
They grow down in and amongst the grass when the light hits it. Those two bucks there, they're kind of they're getting a little impatient with each other. Something about that social behavior reaction right there. There they go. Hear those hooves hitting each other. Now the one standing there, he just got his point across. And the smaller buck's running off now.
Isn't that the way it always is? The big boy always wins out.
That's right. Now, if this would have been 2 months from now when the deer have hardened antlers in the rut, they wouldn't have used their hoofs. They would have bowed their necks and clashed their antlers together.
I think that's the first time I've seen them stand up on their hind legs and fight with their paws. I mean, I've seen small deer, but, you know, just like playing, but those, the first time I've seen them really fight.
That's a normal reaction of the does in the herd. They will get mad, and that's the way they'll fight each other, and that's fairly commonly seen amongst the female segment. But the bucks don't do that except when they don't have their hardened antlers. That's their way of one becoming dominant over the other. And all in white-tailed deer, just like in human beings or dogs, they all have their pecking order. He's still not sure that smaller buck understood his point of view. There's the bigger deer again.
What's the number of years that he could produce those horns? He's getting pretty much at the end of his life.
Yeah, this is really what intensive white-tailed deer management's all about. A lot of ranchers and hunters will see deer like this, and of course the hunters are ready and willing to shoot them, but you'll hear on occasion, especially the ranchers, say, well, you know, that's my seed buck. I don't want to kill him. That's the biggest buck out there. Well, this deer, he's been in this herd and been producing and spreading his genes for 6 years. He was sexually capable of breeding when he was 1.5 years old, and he has been spreading this gene around. He's reaching a time in his life to where his teeth have worn, and you could lose this deer at any time to any number of causes. You could lose him to a fighting accident during a rut, and when you try to be commercial and recoup some of your money back from an operation like this, you've got to harvest these deer at their peak. and their peak antler is 5 and 6.5 years old. And that's kind of the name of the game. All of these bucks here are younger bucks that you see here in this picture. You've got deer scattered throughout all age classes. You've got 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. Your smaller deer, which is like little 6, maybe little 8-point deer, most of those deer are yearling deer, first antlers. There are some spike deer in this deer herd. They're here every year. You can't totally get rid of the spike trait in deer herd, whether it's genetic or whether it's nutritional. It's always going to be there. Some years it's less predominant than others. But intensive management is done in numerous type ways. This particular ranch, one of the techniques that has been used in recent years here to try to grow only the largest and the best bucks is culling every deer on the ranch that has less than 6 points, even if it's his first set of antlers, is trying to leave only 6-point and better deer with the first set of antlers. And if a deer ever reached 2.5 years old and he doesn't have a minimum of 8 points, that deer most definitely can be culled from the herd in an enclosed intensive management area. And I want to stress that, because you can't take white-tailed deer management tools or techniques that's used on a place like this and just apply them to open range, because every ranch is different. And on open range, you don't have total control of a deer herd like you do under high fence. So I really don't want anybody to misconstrue what I'm saying and take it out of context and some of the things that are being done here on the Golla Ranch and try to apply it to their 320 acres in Lavaca or Fayette County or Colorado County.
You know, you can really see the ear tag there, the orange ear tag, and I noticed that particular buck has a little drop down on the left antler, and that's what most hunters really like to see.
That's right. How many times through the years, aging deer, seeing the deer that's killed in Colorado County, Fayette County, Lavaca County, our department people through the years have collected around 100 deer a year per county. We have a good database on age and antler development. Very seldom you ever see the drop point on a deer. And that's because most deer just don't live long enough out in the wild to develop these type characteristics. This particular deer with the orange ear tag is 3.5 years old. He should be an outstanding deer once he reaches that 5 to 6 year old age class. There's some decent deer in this group here with the big buck again. And you'll see as we film him off and on, you'll see an outstanding deer and you think, boy, that's a really good deer, and then this deer walks up and really makes him look bad. There's a deer right there with heavy horns, decent spread, pretty good looking deer. But then when you flip back to the large deer there, they really don't compare. There was an outstanding deer in this herd last year that, again, we talk about the chances you play with trying to keep deer. This deer was a 6.5-year-old deer, and he never made it to season. J.W. found him dead there in the pasture. We're not sure what of.
Ranch owner J.W. Golla.
Deer, we're tagging them for the Parks and Wildlife. They're running a study on the teeth. They aging, some of the ranches are aging, the way I understand it, some of these deer, and they don't really know if they're aging them right, due to the fact that they're eating on feed and not, just grazing and wearing their teeth off. That's the purpose of the tagging.
Bob was telling us about the acreage that you have and the, you know, buck to doe ratio, it just seems like you have a lot of deer and a lot of age class. I think that's impressive.
Well, we have, it's less than one buck, one doe per buck. I don't know, we hadn't made a study yet this year, survey, but we have more bucks than does.
Yeah, it's impressive to see all the different age groups that you have, and I think the tagging sure helps to know what bucks are a little bit more inclined to grow bigger horns and wider horns and things like that.
Well, it helps everybody, other ranchers too, that come over here and look at these deer to get an idea of what they're doing. Last year and this year, we're going to kill everything that doesn't have 6 points the first year.
So you're taking out the ones that may be inferior to the...
That's right.
And that's what research is all about, to
Yes, sir.
go the biggest and the best. And
Right.
well, I'm impressed, J.W. I think you've done a magnificent job, and I know Parks and Wildlife has felt like you've been really helpful in working together for this research, and we appreciate, you know, especially I appreciate being able to come over and look at these and get some videos.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you Parks and Wildlife for helping me also.
You know, J.W. mentioned the buck-doe ratios and fawn crops that we have in this place. I didn't tell you those numbers. Let me tell you those right quick, Robert. There are a few more bucks than there are does in this pasture, but for all practical purposes, we'll just refer to it as a 1-to-1 buck-doe ratio. The fawn crops inside this fence on this ranch will run between 70 and 100%. Probably average out somewhere around 80–85% each year. So you can see you have a highly reproductive deer herd that is putting a lot of fawns into this herd every year. So therefore, you have to take out a lot of deer every year to make up for this, or you get way too many deer. This is a sheep creed feeder that J.W. uses to just put his feed to the deer, and he has 12 of these scattered out strategically around the ranch. These deer come to this feed at first a little reluctantly. A person just starting out on this will need to mix a little corn in with the high protein feed, which is usually in a 3/16 inch pellet. The deer then start taking the feed along with the corn, and you can gradually withdraw the corn, and they get to where they take it real readily. As you can see, they know what rattling the sack and slamming the lid on the feeder means. It almost looks like there's not very many does at all on this ranch. Everywhere you look, it seems to be antlers sticking up in the sky. That deer, I believe, is the one with the drop point on it. He seems to be one of the calmer of the bunch.
I think you're right, Bob. I was hoping we got another shot at it to let everybody see that drop tine. I think that buck sure is the one that has that small drop tine on that left antler.
Yeah, that drop tine's about probably 3.5 inches long, and right about the tip of the left ear is where it's located on the main beam. There's another deer in this pasture I hope we get to see later that has a point that comes out at the base, and it's about 6 or 7 inches long, and it comes out and turns down and has about a 3 or 4 inch point that comes out of the base of it and wraps around it. It's an unusual type set of horn or antlers also. As you can see the number of deer that's being produced on this place, there's no way this 320 acres could produce this amount of deer without the high protein feed. The food supply is just not there. The density on this ranch is about a deer to a little less than 2 acres. We try to run somewhere around 165 animals on this 320 acres. A good point we might want to discuss right here, it would be the growth of a deer's body, and exactly what a deer goes through to get to that 5 and 6 year old age class, to develop his body size and his antlers. The body of a white-tailed deer grows its most from, of course, which would be natural, from birth to 1.5 year old. That's the most noticeable body growth. Then a lot of what this deer eats goes to bone and muscle development up into 4.5 years of age. And that's why you will see a gradually increase in antler size up to the 5 and 6 year old age class, is because a lot of the calcium and phosphorus that's in the food a deer eats goes into producing bone and growing the bone structure on these animals. And so that leaves a little bit left over to put in the antlers. But as the deer progresses towards the older age class, more and more of the calcium and phosphorus is put into antler development. And that's why your peak antlers come at 5 and 6 years old, is because the body is developed, the bone structure is developed on these deer. Once a deer finishes the rut and sheds its antlers, immediately everything that he eats goes to replenish the fat supplies in the body, get him back into good condition. And then once antler development starts, it takes a minimal amount to maintain the body, and the majority of what this deer eats can go to antlers. And that's why you get the bigger set of antlers on 5 and 6 year old deer. Now that deer is a 8-point deer. I don't see an ear tag in him. Just looking at him and from past experience on this ranch, that deer is at least 3.5, probably in the 4.5 year old age class. And where you're trying to go 10-point plus type deer, that deer would be one that would be a likely candidate for culling out of the herd. There's no use feeding him any longer past this hunting season. And these are some deer that JW can sell and cull out of the herd and get some money to keep providing this high protein feed for his deer herd. JW he approaches this from a commercial standpoint. However, he gets a lot of enjoyment just out of growing these deer. What hunter wouldn't like to see that picture, Robert, when a group of deer run off and it's all horns?
That's right. You don't get to see that very much, especially all in one view.
Here's another pretty good deer. This deer is a 4.5-year-old deer. I believe he's an ear tagged. He's the last deer in that group of 4 bucks. He has a forked back tine on the left side, and on the right side he has 2 points that kind of come out of the same base out on the end of the horn. I keep saying horn, and that's not true. White-tailed deer grow antlers. Cows grow horns. Horn is made up of hair, and antlers are bone. That's a group of young bucks standing there with those 2 older bucks. There's some deer on this place, like the large deer we saw earlier, that have tine length in the neighborhood of 12 inches. There's deer on here who have as much as 7 typical points on one side. Of course, you've seen the drop tine deer, the deer with some kicker tines. Most of his older age class bucks have 10 or more points on them. And dealing with hunters through the years, hunters key more to number of points than they do probably anything else on a deer.
I think a 10-point buck is usually one that is mature, and you can almost count on that buck being at least 3.5, and more than likely it'll probably be 4.5, wouldn't it, Bob?
Well, that's true in a lot of instances, Robert. However, in a well-managed, well-fed deer herd, it's not uncommon at all to find a 10-point deer as a yearling.
Is that right?
That's right.
Of course, I don't think anybody want to shoot that 10-point buck as a yearling, because you no telling what he'd look like when he was 4.5, 5 years old.
That's right. That's your potential trophy deer or Boone and Crockett deer if you're trying to grow a Boone and Crockett deer. Now, this is that forked back tine deer again. He just walked off into the brush there to the right. And that's not a bad deer on the left. The deer, the little buck there on the right-hand part of the screen, I would say that deer is probably a yearling deer, first set of horns. The deer right to its left, looking at him, that's also probably a yearling deer of the year. First set of antlers.
I think it's impressive to see all age classes of deer on this property, where you know that you're replenishing your herd when you get these yearlings coming back and having that many of that are bucks.
That shows the proper alignment of bucks within a deer herd, Robert. A deer herd that has all young deer, or a deer herd that has all old deer, there's something wrong with that deer herd. If you don't have a proper scattering of bucks throughout all of the age classes, then number one, you know you haven't had consistent good fawn crops through the years. We found that one of the things is, as much as nutrition as to producing fawns, is to have cover out there for the fawns during that critical time of year when they're born. May and June in this area of the state. We did a 3-year research job on this down in the lower part of Colorado, Lavaca County, and did the same study over in Gonzales County. And we found that when you have old grazed pastures and going through a stressful time of May and June, it's a lot easier for predators, coyotes mainly, to see these fawns laying on the ground and to go over and get them. For the most part, a fawn up to 2 weeks old will just lay very still and not move at all unless the mother comes to the fawn to get him up to nurse. The cover is real important for hiding these fawns where predators, coyotes, cannot see them. And for a time period, I'm not sure how long it is when that fawn is young, it is odorless. So a coyote cannot smell the fawns, and cover is of extreme importance to them. And wooded cover is not what I'm talking about as much as I am weeds and grass growth that a fawn can get in. Regardless of what a lot of people may think, these does prefer to lay these fawns around the edges of timber and the edge of openings, not back in the dense brush. As you can see, these the areas around these feeders are beat out real well with tracks and just usage of deer coming in there and standing around and milling, waiting to get their share of the feed. The Parks and Wildlife biologists in this area are working with approximately 12 dozen ranches, high fence, that are supplemental feeding their deer with high protein feed in this area. It seems to be a growing practice.
It seems as though they've really, by mixing the different types of feed, they've really come up with a feed that is used, I guess even statewide. I know East Texas does a lot of feeding of deer and coming up with the right kind of mix, which really, I guess, promote the horns.
Yes, all of these feed mixtures, basically, if you look, go back to the original formula that the department, our Parks and Wildlife Department biologists came up with, that we used on the Kerr wildlife area, still are using there, but this was developed around 1973-74 for the deer we had in the pen research, where we were doing study on spiked antler versus forked antler deer of the same cohort.
And then using this formula, you can get your feed mixed locally and have the same type of feed to feed anywhere you want to.
That's right. Some of these ranchers may change the formula a little bit one way or the other because of maybe to lower the cost a little bit, but generally speaking, they are basically the same feed formulas. And we recommend to these ranchers also, just to make sure that they're getting what they pay for, that they'll run some tests on these feed occasionally, just to make sure that it is up to the 16% protein level. Because it wouldn't take too awful long, several months of a critical time of year feeding these bucks, that you would lose the antler growth for that year if that level of protein really fell very far below 16%.
Bob, do they need the 16% year-round, or is it just during the time that their antlers are growing?
No, you need it year-round for several different reasons. Is because you got things happening within a deer herd on a year-round basis. You got your fawns that one took that feed away from them at any time during this first year, then you run a higher chance of getting some poor antler production in that yearling age class of that year. So it is important that you maintain that 16% level, especially on a year-round basis. These deer probably will be at their highest peak of eating and consuming this supplemental feed during August. That's when your fawns are getting on the feed full time. Your bucks are really just gorging themselves, trying to build up fat supplies going into the rut, because once they start rutting, they cut back on their eating. They obviously have other things on their mind. That's the deer we were looking at a while ago in the opening with the forked left back tine. Let's look a closer look at him. 2 months from now, especially these older age class deer, their necks will be really swollen. Of course, the horns will be polished, velvet red, and they'll be in top physical and fighting condition, just like a boxer training to fight. They build these neck muscles. It's like isometrics. By pushing and pulling against limbs, bases of trees where you see rubs, that's how the neck muscles are built. And as soon as the rut's over, they quit doing this, and the neck sizes will decline.
So it's not actually the neck swells as much as the muscles are toned and built ready for the rut.
That's right. Lots of things that a person can learn and see in a deer herd like this that's just hard to see under normal conditions, because you're not looking at a deer herd that's designed and structured and maintained like Mother Nature meant it to be. That's a pretty sight with that sun coming through the trees on all those antlers. And you can see that the regrowth in the ranch this year was very good. Probably, I'd say it's as good as I've seen it on this ranch. Looks like JW got more gobblers in this bunch than he has anything.
And this is the true example of those that were raised in captivity as compared to your eastern turkey. Those in captivity seem to be a little dumber, and they're more dependent on people than the eastern turkey that the Parks and Wildlife right now is stocking throughout the state.
Well, that's right. We are stocking the eastern bird and the Rio Grande. Last year, our people trapped and stocked over 2,000 Rio Grande turkeys in the state, and some turkeys. That includes turkeys that we traded to some other states for other wildlife. And this particular antler here on this deer, on the left side, see that deer at a distance. In a managed herd like this, you would call that deer a cull and would probably harvest him right off the bat. But with further inspection of that antler, what has happened is the main beam is broken off on this antler right past that second point. And the second point grew down and kind of curled over the side of the antler. So looking at the right antler, where you have 5 typical points, and this is still a young deer, I would leave him to the next year, because this is not a deformity of the antler. Now, hey, Robert, here's this deer I was talking about that had the point that came off of the burr and pointed down almost like a drop point. With closer observation, this deer, there's another point that curls around that point at the base. Again, this deer is a young age class deer, 3.5-year-old deer, I believe, and he has the potential to be a unique set of antlers once this deer reaches maturity. You'd want to keep him strictly because of his uniqueness, as long as he can produce that oddity there on the base of the antler.
There's many a hunter would just love to kill one like that. And I know I've never killed one that had the point coming out of the burr.
That's right. Those are just as uncommon as a drop tine deer. As you can see, you've still got your spike deer here that's present in the herd. These deer in this herd do not last past the hunting season. They are culled out of the herd as soon as it's legal to kill them, and because they just do not produce that top set of antlers as frequently as their forked antlered cohort or deer of the same age class. All 3 of those deer that just crawled on that fence were yearling deer, first set of antlers. One was a spike, and the other 2 were 6-point or better.
And you can sure see which one you'd want to save as compared to, that same age growth and the difference in horns.
That's right. Let me say something else right now, because there has been through the years a lot of controversy about hunting a spike deer. What our department's policy on spikes is we state that a spike deer is not deserved of any protection like he was back in the early 1900s. Up until really 1983, we had a few counties still protecting spikes. We don't say go out and annihilate the spike. That's not our position on it at all either. What we say is that it should be legal game, and it should be the hunter's choice as to which deer that he kills. These are some shed antlers that were picked up, the JW's picked up here on the ranch. The set of antlers right here beside me are the antlers that were shed off of the biggest deer that we've seen today last year. And I'm going to go through and score these antlers to get an idea of about what this deer will score next year. The tine length on this deer, or longest tines, are just short of 12 inches. In measuring for Boone and Crockett, you look for some symmetry and length. And this deer has a lot of both. The only really strong deductions that the deer would have would be on the last points out on the main beam. There's a 4-inch difference in those 2 points. One of them is 4 inches long, the other one is 8 inches long. Main beam length is extreme importance. You got to have a deer in that 25-inch type main beam length to make the book. It just takes a long main beam and points coming off of this main beam that has length. You got your circumference measurements is taken in 4 places in between the points on each antler, and it's the smallest point in between these 2 points projecting off the antler. You do this on both sides. Each horn is measured separately and then compared to the other side, and the deductions taken away from the total score for a net Boone and Crockett score. Now, the way you measure a point is you find the top line on the main beam of the horn and draw your line there with a pencil. Then you take from that point along the outside curvature of the point and to the tip. You do this for each point coming off of the main beam that's considered a normal point. This deer is a basic 10-point deer. He's has broken his brow tines off, so I'll have to estimate his brow tines, and from observing him last year, I'd say he had probably 3.5-inch brow tines on both sides, and I'm going to guess his spread last year inside at about 17 inches. The bases on these antlers are around 4.5 inches on each side. This deer, after I finished scoring him, without deducts, scored 157.5 points.
Probably many folks have seen that sign out on Interstate 10 advertising the J.W. Golla ranches, and I think just on the other side of Columbus on Interstate 10 out by the Bernardo turnoff.
Yeah, J.W. has some other places that he does his quail and dove and duck and goose hunting on All of his deer hunting is done on 320 acres, but he does advertise some other places for bird hunting. But I have to say his true love is the white-tailed deer.
And you can see why.